Green Growth Institute, the FINI initiative of the Atlantic Council, and the FCDO. And before we start, I want to say that we not only need new structures, I think we need a transformation, a whole of society and economy and financial systems transformation to shape the new adaptation economy. Adaptation is about stability, and we have to start considering financing it as the insurance policy of the future, as Una Mai Gordon yesterday said at an event. I also want to acknowledge for a moment that we are in the middle of the Amazon forest, which is a critical tipping point of climate and really vulnerable to climate change. And I think, well, we often say that adaptation, implementation, and financing of it is local. Our world is interconnected, and we depend on the resilience of local systems. And with that, I'd like to welcome our welcoming speakers and exceptional leaders in the space of financing adaptation and resilience. Please give a round of applause to Jorge Gastulemendi, the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council Climate Resilience Center, to Debbie Palmers, the Climate and Environment Director of the FCDO, welcome, and Ferruccio Santetti, Strategy Lead at the GGGI. Thank you. I think for this welcoming session, I'd like to focus on why adaptation finance matters, how we do it, and what we have to do. And Debbie, I'd like you to start to tell us why adaptation finance is so critical.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. I'd like marks out of 10 for how I'm doing with my microphone. You can score me at the end. I'm delighted to be here with the Centre for Access to Climate Finance, GGGI, and the Atlantic Council in this session. We're here at an adaptation COP. Our Brazilian hosts have been really clear about that, and we all know that as climate impacts accelerate, it's going to be vital to accelerate the scale and pace of adaptation and to build resilience as we go. We know that the transition to climate resilient economies is needed, we know what's required, and we already know many of the solutions. The major challenge, as we all know, is getting finance flowing to where it's needed. And it's quite easy, I think, to be disheartened by the scale of the adaptation finance gap and the challenges in accessing finance and getting it to the most vulnerable communities and the most vulnerable countries. But I'm pretty inspired that we've got ideas on the table, we've got ambition, we've got collaborative efforts that are evident in the initiatives we're going to be discussing today. There's a lot to take heart from. This is my third, fourth, fifth event on adaptation, and actually there is so much going on at local level around the world. It is quite extraordinary, and there's something about the fact that we need to take heart, ensure that we are learning from each other, and then find ways to keep driving forward scale by taking away the blockages and taking away the things that make it more complicated than it needs to be. The UK is strongly committed to ensuring that climate vulnerable countries have improved access to high quality and effective finance from all sources for adaptation and resilience. And we are delivering, we have very, very nearly delivered our commitment to increase our finance for adaptation to 1.5 billion in 2025. And in the next few weeks, that will all come good and we will have met that commitment. I'm very proud of that. It wasn't a given, and we've worked very hard to achieve it. But that finance, that public finance on its own is never going to be enough. It's very precious, the grant finance, and we're going to need to move beyond treating adaptation as a... Sorry, I've just had a message about the mic, and I didn't know what it was. Oh, it was you. Sorry, please don't fan my mic. So public finance is never going to be enough, and we're going to need to move beyond thinking about adaptation and resilience as a discrete silo to actually ensuring it's integrated across the whole of our economies, the whole of our societies, and we need to be incentivizing spending and the right decisions, resilient decisions from governments, from businesses, from households, from consumers. You know, we need a whole society revolution really to get our heads around this and make sure we are all building in future costs and future risks. And so we are listening and responding to calls from the Global South to improve, for example, the coordination of finance behind national plans. We need coherence in the support. That's going to be vital for scaling up. We need country-led platforms and programmatic approaches. We know that there's a whole range of initiatives burgeoning in different countries around the world, many of which have been very successful at helping to organize finance and attract greater scale of finance. And as the co-chair of the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance, and indeed the sponsor of the Centre for Access to Climate Finance, I'm really delighted that the Centre's here today to present the initial findings from its work on country-led programmatic approaches to do that scaling up. It's really exciting stuff. Under the Task Force, we are partnering with a set of pioneer countries to develop and demonstrate innovative country-led platform approaches for climate finance. I've been catching up with Jamaica while I was here. I was really delighted to hear yesterday from a representative from Jamaica that actually the work we've been doing in the UK to help them build resilience into their infrastructure has withstood some of the ravages of Hurricane Melissa in a really positive way, which is helpful. Meeting with my Rwandan counterpart today as well, hearing about what's happening in Rwanda is really encouraging. So we need to learn from these approaches. We need to help more countries adopt them in order that everyone can move forward to scale. So I've been talking about national level structures. The very last point from me is that, of course, we mustn't forget we have to place people at the heart of this endeavour. The UK champions locally led approaches because we know that local communities are on the front line. We know that when local communities are involved, decisions are more context specific, they're more equitable, and they're more efficient. So for me, just to conclude by saying we are very committed to this work. We want to help ensure that vulnerable countries have the right support and the right investment to build a climate resilient future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. And I think what you said about that we have to put people at the center is really critical. Sorry for that. Oh, is that working? Yes, great. We have to put people at the center, and we have to listen to vulnerable communities. We have to listen to vulnerable countries. And I also want to highlight we would have had the Evans Nieva, the chair of the LDC group, that adaptation was a negotiation agenda decades ago already from these countries. So the adaptation agenda has been pushed. The global goal in adaptation is going to the merit of the African group of negotiators. So thank you for highlighting that point. Because you mentioned the importance of national adaptation plans and financing them, Jorge, do you want to share with us a little bit about FINI and why we're doing it?
Sure. Thanks, Sabrina, and thanks for the invitation. So FINI. FINI is the acronym for collective drive called Fostering Investable National Adaptation and Implementation, FINI, for adaptation and resilience. I should haven't put the adaptation in
Another
between.
acronym.
Yeah. So FINI actually is it's trying to answer. It became with two questions that we started. The genesis of this comes 3 years ago. That is it too crazy to ask ourselves if there is enough connection between private sector actors and public sector actors around adaptation finance? Are they talking enough? Are they coming to the table enough? Are they listening to each other? Are they just bringing down the myths of both sides around adaptation and investability on adaptation? And the second question that we put is it too crazy to think that the tools that the private sector has been developing on trying to test how to make adaptation investable could be translated into the public space. And so, as an answer to that, the two answers that we got was, no, it's not crazy. There is much more to be done between connecting private and public actors, on the one hand. But out of that dialogue, what came very clear is that the private sector was looking for signals coming from the public side on how to engage, and whether the tools that the public side had on advancing adaptation would be enough, fit for purpose for the private sector to engage. And so out of that conversation, it was clear that NAPs, National Adaptation Plans, and other adaptation planning processes were yet to be fit for purpose to start bridging that conversation between private and public. So we started navigating that, and what we discovered is the following, that in the space of the private sector side, particularly the private financial sector, but a set of other actors in that ecosystem, there is plenty that is happening around risk analytics, risk management, valuation tools, ROI tools, cost-benefit analysis, capital stacks, thinking about tools that could blend both public and private capital. There is a lot there, and that is not being put up to the surface to a point in which that can be consumed by actors on the public side, so they can then deploy tools and mechanisms that will start speaking to each other. So FINI has been selected as one of the plan to accelerate solutions by the COP presidency. We are announcing it tomorrow, and we'll have a high-level event on Friday that is going to showcase up to 80 different actors that have joined FINI to indicate how they are doing advancing tools, approaches, standards that showcase invisibility of adaptation. And the idea is that then with that showcase, we can start moving into opportunities to engage with the public actors to find opportunities to advance deals, advance information, knowledge, capacity building, and in that process of enhancing NAPs, but also other adaptation policy processes. So with that, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jorge. And I think collaboration is absolutely critical, because resilience doesn't work without collaboration, and we have to come together to sit on a table and have these conversations. And as you say, the solutions are there. We have to make this happen now. Thank you, Jorge. I would now like to turn to you, Ferruccio. You have extensive experience in designing and deploying capital structures on green finance, but also on adaptation and resilience. Could you share a bit more about the what, the financial structures, and how to finance adaptation and resilience?
Sure, I'll try. One of the many surprises of this week was having a printer in the office that doesn't actually print, so I don't have talking points. I'll swing it, but it's a good question.
That's okay.
And it's great to share this space with Debbie and Jorge. The way we look at it, the financial sector is there, and what it really excels at is the identification, quantification, pricing, and why not even remuneration of risks, right? That's what the financial sector excels at. And when we look at the medium and long-term risks, right, the World Economic Forum year after year comes out with this list showing us that the risks that have the highest likelihood of happening and the highest degree of impact are the risks related with environmental degradation and climate change. So ideally, we would like to see an increased flow of finance flowing into adaptation and resilience. Then when we look into the flows of climate finance, right, the famous $1.9 trillion that the world channeled to the climate agenda last year, we saw that less than 3% or less than 4% actually flowed to adaptation and resilience. So we think that really an important area to stress is regulation or increased action related with identification, quantification and disclosure of nature and climate-related financial risks. Right? We have a very interesting case study when we look at the European Union. In 2021, financial institutions within the European Union, only 5% of those institutions, of those commercial financial institutions, identify themselves as being exposed to climate change. Only 5% of financial institutions in a jurisdiction as advanced as the European Union. In 2021, the European Commission passed the SFDR regulation, right, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, mandating the identification and disclosure of nature and climate-related financial risks. And suddenly, in 2023, 95% of financial institutions identified themselves as being highly exposed to climate change. And as a result of that, more than half of financial institutions in the European Union today adopt best practices when it comes to risk management, right? So we think that's really an important aspect of the work in financing resilience and adaptation. Is not only the conversation at the level of instruments, which is obviously very important, not only at the level of mechanisms, but really regulation to incentivize financial institutions to take the first step, right? Understand your degree of exposure. Once they understand the degree of exposure, it's the bank's job to mitigate those risks, to find way to price that risk in their lending portfolio, right? And that really is how the paradigm shift happens, is when we price risk into credit lines, when funding or financing an asset or a project or an expenditure that is exposed to climate change becomes more pricey, right? And therefore we have developers and enterprises have a financial incentive to adopt the resilience measures. So we think that's a key point. In GGGI, we are trying to scale up our efforts of working with financial regulators on these aspects, working with superintendencies of banks, of capital markets, central banks, to advance towards this, you start with awareness, then you move towards capacity, and finally enforcement, right? So we are moving along this line. In parallel, working at the level of design and structuring of mechanism and instruments, the climate finance agenda really is driven by fixed income instruments, right? If we speak plainly, bonds drive the climate finance agenda. So it's essential that we integrate those concepts into those capital raising instruments so that the institutions or organizations that are raising funding from capital markets, being sovereigns, quasi-sovereign, or financial institutions, then earmark those funding for resilience and adaptation interventions. The challenge there is it's really hard to find a national or a regional taxonomy that really integrates resilience and adaptation, right? For the nature of resilience and adaptation. Even if we look at the CBI resilience taxonomy, it's not as objective and clear as the taxonomy for energy efficiency or renewable energy. Right? You can't have a percentage or a threshold. So the argument of significant or material contribution towards resilience is a difficult one, but it's really relevant. And that's what we are trying to work on with the sovereigns that we are assisting in their capital raising efforts and in their debt management processes, ensuring that adaptation and resilience is integrated in their financing frameworks. So we are currently working, for example, with the government of Peru in updating their sovereign sustainability bond framework that now is going to integrate categories specifically earmarked to adaptation and resilience. The same in Ecuador, right? So again, I guess the message, it's very important, obviously, to discuss at the level of mechanism and instruments, but we do see a key role for superintendencies, for regulators to really play, at least at the beginning, right? To incentivize financial institutions to understand the degree of exposure. Once that is understood, the European Union experience tells us that, right, then the financial sector is more willing and incentivized to take the lead.
Thank you, Ferruccio, and I think it's a really important point. And alongside that, we need to incentivize the resilience benefits, because we now know with increasing evidence that resilience contributes to debt sustainability. And I think these kind of links are so important to drive this machine, because risk is now material. Our financial and economic assumptions did not integrate these risks, but they are here and we have to. Thank you for that. I thank you so much for your welcoming and opening remarks. I would like now the next set of panelists to welcome them on stage. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Ferruccio. Thank you, Debbie, for your contributions. I'd now like to welcome on stage Sarah Shaman, who is the Director of Sustainable Finance Engagement at BNP Paribas. Please take a seat and grab a mic. Liz Henderson, you're the Global Head of Climate Risk Advisory at Aon. Amanda McKee, Director of Knowledge and Learning from the NDC Partnership. I'd also like to welcome Akram Sohail, Additional Secretary of the Bangladesh Climate Development Partnership. Welcome. Thank you for being here with us. And ultimately, Nicholas Taylor, Adaptation and Resilience Lead of the GGI's SAFA facility. Welcome, and thank you for joining. I'd like to discuss two things with you. One is, I'd like to speak about the challenges that you face in accessing finance for adaptation and resilience and in financing adaptation and resilience more on the bank and financial institution side. But I'd also like to then head over to the solutions and innovations that exist. I know we get bored about speaking about challenges. I still think it's important that we know where we're coming from and how we can address those. Liz, I know you have a hard stop. I think I would like to start with you. I saw you speaking earlier on a panel on the immense capabilities that the insurance industry has on the risk analytics capabilities, but also, you know, in the role of asset managers and investors. Could you share with us, from your perspective, what the specific challenges are that you face in ensuring and financing adaptation resilience?
That's a great question. Can you guys hear me? Okay, sounded quiet. That's a great question, and I think coming at this from an insurance angle is something that oftentimes it's either overly focused on, where people look at the benefits of adaptation to be directly within the context of insurance. But then at the same time, it's often an afterthought when you're talking about the project development, planning, and quantifying of the actual benefits of the project. But just to give a little background, what we do at Aon as a global insurance broker, we're working with clients from individual corporations, public sector infrastructure developers, as well as the investment community to really help insure their assets and help them to protect their business operations. But more and more, what we're doing with our clients is actually taking them on an adaptation journey. So with the data and the analytics and the investment that we've made in understanding climate risk over the hundreds of years that insurance has been insuring climate risk, you know, we're now able to really precisely help our clients quantify their risk that they're facing today, calculate the benefit of certain investments in resilience, and therefore unlock that ROI. But I think one of the big challenges that I face in our role as a broker is really I would call it a misalignment of benefits when you think about resilience and adaptation, in particular when it comes to infrastructure. So we know that infrastructure is incredibly important when it comes to reducing risk. We want more investment in nature-based solutions to reduce flooding. We want water management systems that help to reduce the impact of heavy rainfall. We want better cooling systems to reduce the impact of heat, et cetera. But oftentimes those projects are financed from a public perspective or a public good incentive, and you don't necessarily capture the full breadth of benefit because the beneficiaries are the homeowners and the business owners who might be protected by a new floodplain, and they're not capturing or seeing that benefit necessarily in better access to insurance or better pricing of their risk because it's more understood by the insurance industry. So that misalignment of benefits, I think, is really important to understand when you're going into a conversation around adaptation financing, because if we can bring those two things together in a more precise way, and we can upfront be able to calculate what are the total downstream benefits of this type of investment to reduced insurance premiums, or two, better access even to insurance capital, I think we're going to be able to really embed that value in the upfront financing. And so to me, that's a challenge. You asked me to start with challenges, so that's the big challenge that we have right now. I do think it's something that can easily be overcome. It just takes quite a lot more collaboration and maybe a different way of approaching these projects and a different way of thinking about them from the beginning.
Thank you so much, Liz. And I think it also emphasizes again the need for, standards for enabling policies that actually align what these benefits are.
Well, and I think, yes, we need more standards, but I would say also an embedding of the insurance perspective in those standards, because I do think that, there's a lot of recommendations around how to make your house more hardened against wildfires, for example. But not all of those investments directly relate to how an insurer is going to price your risk. But often people want it to be taken into account. So it's that sort of connectivity of setting the standards, making the recommendations, and having the insurers help in part to inform that.
Yeah, and I want to mention this great example of security belts in cars, which is an example how the insurance industry actually generated a standard for an entire industry that you have to establish a security belt in your cars. And I think the same goes for building resilience.
Well, I love that example. We always use it as an industry member. We always use that example of, look, we can do good, but there are other more recent ones that we can look at as well, but not enough. And I think the seatbelt is such a great narrative, but how long ago was that? Was 70 years ago? I don't know, 50 years ago? Before my time. I mean, I've always had to wear a seatbelt in a car. But yeah, I mean, there's ways for us to have that influence now in a bigger way and come up with some new stories that we can use.
Thank you so much, Liz. I'd like to now hand the word to you, Mr. Akram Sohail, because Bangladesh has been leading playing a really important role and leadership in country platforms for climate investments and engaging the local private sector. And in so many conversations about adaptation finance, Bangladesh is mentioned as an example of leadership. Can you share with us a bit more, still staying on the challenges side, what the challenges are for you to access adaptation finance and especially international adaptation finance?
Thank you very much. I'm very glad and honored to be here. In Bangladesh, to stop the working in silo, especially the climate issues, what we did that we developed the Bangladesh Climate Development Platform. That is a bit super ministerial body. The related most related 9 ministries, secretaries are the member, and the senior secretary from the Prime Minister's office is the chair. And development partners are also there. CSO are there. Academia are there. This is a whole of government approach. And if you want to take any sort of climate related projects, that project has to pass through that platform. So the era of working in working fragmentation way, the working in silo, we're going to stop there. So better coordination, number one. Number two, that our fiscal space already shrinked. That is the reality. We have the loan $104 billion, and just for the last year. Okay. Thank you very much. And last year we repaid only, the $4.77 billion for the repayment of loan. And this is, 16.9% of our total revenue generated money. Whereas we spend only 3% for our health sector, 11% for our education, and 16.9% for the repayment. So my request is, better coordination is needed, and that is there. And we developed another example for the vulnerable countries. that is Adaptation Clinic. What is Adaptation Clinic? For the whole area, the poor farmers, they cannot access to the latest technology. Say early warning system. MIT is giving us the information that next 1 month there might be a flash flood. So they are getting a chance to harvest their paddies. So, and we have a very strong background of NGOs. Some global NGOs are in Bangladesh. Say BRAC, I'm sure that you know the name. And we have a very strong background regarding the microfinance. So what my friend is talking about, that insurance, in Bangladesh, we requested our insurance companies, please go for them and take the risk. But they are very reluctant because, there are many areas, they are flooded twice in a year. The whole area, how they will settle the claims, with a huge amount of claim. So those are the area where we need the assistance from the development partners. And the Adaptation Clinic, that is a very fantastic model that the poor farmer are accessing to the from the latest technology, and their seeds are given the latest technologically very latest seeds. Say some part of Bangladesh is drought prone, some part is flood prone. So we are giving the seeds. If it is flood prone, then submersible paddy seeds. It will be helpful for them. So, and any sort of problem in the insects or others in their paddy or like that, so they can take the photo and they can show straight send it to the experts. And looking at the photo, the experts are saying that your paddy has got this sort of problem, so you can take the measures immediately. So these are the good examples. And another model we just developed, that is eco-synergy adaptation model. That is for Bangladesh. It is working. The methane emission from the livestock is very common, globally common. We have taken a huge project. That is, our livestock department is the member of that eco-synergy team. And another private sector, from private sector, in Bangladesh, the 38% is from fund goes for the adaptation, and 90% is loan. 90% is loan, gentlemen. So private sector is there, and the development partner, one development partner is there, and we from the International Climate Finance Cell, as I am the chair, we requested one expert to be the member of that group. How to develop the project proposal, concept to project proposal. The GCF, for GCF, we have taken, one project has taken 9 years to pass through. It's the ground reality is going to be changed by 9 years' time. So we requested them seriously that from concept to project proposal, it should not be more than a year. So eco-synergy team is working here very well, that one mentor is given how to develop the global projects. How to develop the global projects, and the development partner is also there, and the Ministry of Finance is with them. So this team working together to develop an adaptation project, that is also very whole of government approach, and it will be implementable very quickly. So these are the interventions we are trying to do in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for highlighting the importance of collaboration, but also that the multilateral system and the climate funds have to speed up. It's too long.
Scale up and speed up.
Exactly, and align as well. Thank you so much. Liz, I know you have to jump in 5 minutes. Do you have a minute to just quickly share some innovations for ensuring adaptation resilience?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of ways that, and actually happily, there's a lot of good examples. I think one thing that I always reflect on is they are local examples. And it was the last panel that someone was talking about how resilience really is a local challenge, and you have to take the local communities into account. So I'll kind of give some of those examples. The first is the work that we're doing with the International Red Cross. So the Red Cross, as you all know, probably is a global aid organization, and they have a disaster relief emergency fund that is primarily funded by donors, governments, aid organizations, and the monies are directly paid out to local communities when there's a disaster and when they don't have other either sovereign funding in their own countries or insurance, private capital there to protect them. We know that some of the challenges with international aid at the moment, with USAID backing out and other organizations sort of reducing some of their funding, that they were not able to raise as much money as they were hoping to be able to raise. And so we came in as a broker with some insurance partners to design actually an insurance policy that is a backstop to their DREF fund. The insurance policy kicks in as a way, when they reach a certain threshold, that means they're not able to access the funding money anymore. They've run out of funds. They need to be able to access that capital. And last year in 2024, the policy did pay out. It paid out about $15 million, 13 million Swiss francs. And it went to 1.2 million individuals across 10 countries. So these people were receiving direct payments from this insurance policy after flooding, after typhoons, after droughts. One of the key benefits of this, so that's a typical kind of insurance outcome. The resilience comes in because people are able to rebuild and recover after the event. But what the Red Cross wants to do is, because they have this expanded amount of capital they can access, it allows them to spend more of their DREF money for pre-disaster support. Because you know that every dollar you spend before a disaster can save you $6 to $14 if you wait to do it after. So it's significant impact. They were always constrained to be able to do it because they had to have the money to recover after an event, but now this gives them that cushion that they can spend down. So it's a really great way where you can come in with an innovative solution. You're using a very traditional insurance product, but it's being applied to an aid program, and it's allowing them to expand their spending into resilience. So I think for me that's one of the best examples that we have that shows that partnership across international organizations and can bring insurance into those local communities. And then with that, I will just step away. I want to apologize that I have to leave. I'm going straight to the airport, heading back home, and I'm really sad because I'm going to have such, I don't know if FOMO is a phrase that people have here, but I wish I was staying longer for this COP because it's been excellent. So thank you for inviting me, and very nice to
just to
participate.
One single point for you, especially for the insurance for the vulnerable countries, that we are getting a good result, that we have a strong microfinance system. When we talk about the insurance to the farmers, they think it's an extra burden. But if it is enveloped in the microfinance, the amount is very less. But they are taking it, and in return, when the natural disaster takes place, they are getting very good benefit. So some countries you can think of the insurance within the envelope of the microfinance assistance. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. Safe travels home. Thank you for your participation. I really love that example, by the way, because it was not an innovation in the insurance product itself, but an innovation in the partnership. Now, I want to give the word to you, Amanda, because you at the NDC partnership, you are doing really important work on strengthening countries' capacities and capabilities to plan for climate and to access finance. Could you share with us what your challenges are that you're facing and observing?
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to start just by reiterating the NDC partnership. We support our developing country members through the whole life cycle of their NDC. So from the development to the implementation to the finance. And through that, we're supporting almost 110 developing countries. And we have a lot of insights and evidence that we can draw from. And one of the things that we've done with that is we've been working with FCDO and the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance to host the Center on Access to Climate Finance, to ensure that we're really taking those lessons and embedding them into the discussions and the policy spaces where they can have the most impact. And I think the first thing I wanted to share, when we look at the requests for support that countries bring forward to the NDC partnership, there's this assumption that it's mitigation focused. Actually, half of the requests for support that we receive are on adaptation. So this is it's a core priority. It's something that countries are thinking about within their NDC, and this gives us a really important opportunity to think about the financing of those instruments and how we use that to further adaptation. So there's two specific challenges I wanted to share that we see consistently across countries. And the first one is at the country level, which is the level of institutional and technical capacity that exists, and the barriers that this places for accessing finance. So we see many governments, they don't have enough capacity, enough actual manpower in the government, and then in some cases don't have the expertise to really prepare the projects that are needed in a way that they're bankable. There's fragmented planning and weak integration of adaptation into national development plans and fiscal frameworks, which also can lead to inefficiencies. It can lead to duplication of opportunity or duplication of efforts and then missed opportunities. And then the third one is this conversation around the enabling environments in the country, and the challenges in addressing those. And this is one particular challenge because when we look at this on a project by project basis, often those broader enabling conditions are overlooked. The second challenge is more at the global systemic level, and this is on the access to public and private climate finance. So really hindered by the complex procedures, the processes, and some of the eligibility requirements. And so it's not to say that we need to get rid of requirements, but really looking at ways to bring efficiency into the system, collaboration, standardization across climate finance providers. There's also a challenge around the high perceived risks that exist, and this is particularly strong when we are looking at adaptation. We're looking at climate vulnerable countries. And then lastly, I would just note the international public finance. It remains difficult to access because of this misalignment that sometimes takes place across funders, the stringent eligibility criteria, the slow approvals, the complex processes. So this is something that we're working not just with countries, but also with the financial providers to help them to think through what some of these opportunities are and ensure that we can also take some of those learning to the countries and bridge that gap. But I'll come to the solutions in the next round.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And I think the specific point on building capacities and capabilities is really important, and I want to connect it a bit with what Jorge said earlier about FINI, how also we can transfer private sector capabilities into government processes, because it starts there. It's the very start, and I think sometimes we forget that when we think about complicated financial instruments. It starts with the capacity and the human capacity. Sarisha, from a commercial bank's perspective, what is from your side the challenge or the challenges in investing into adaptation resilience?
Sure, and thank you for the invitation as well. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So from our perspective, I think one of the things that's really important is to look at some of the practicality of the market opportunities when it comes to adaptation financing. I think one of the biggest challenges is that we need to bring much more granularity into what that looks like. So in terms of some of the work that we're doing at BNP Paribas, we've kind of positioned quite a lot around trying to look at how physical risk and adaptation will shape certain markets. And I think there's 4 key areas for this. So firstly, I would say that we know that adaptation investment does yield benefits. I think that's in the multiples, and I'm not going to go through the kind of figures of the ratios. I think we're all quite familiar with that. But What's interesting is to turn some of that adaptation financing gap more into looking at the market opportunities. So we've been speaking a lot to investors about how adaptation finance can drive sustainable growth, support vulnerable populations to ensure that some of those costs are actually reduced. And I think the colleague from Aon talked about that really, really concretely. And critically, creating more resilient economies in the long term. So I don't think at the moment it's a question of whether adaptation finance makes sense. I think it's a question of how do we mobilize scale capital fast and in ways that address three key things are really important from a framework perspective. One is adaptation finance that addresses local hazards. Two is to have a very sector-specific lens. And I think the third is to look at what are the regional adaptation priorities in certain countries, whether that's, to the point of the panel, local, regional, or national. So from a market opportunity perspective, I think there's four key areas that we see as really important for changing the dynamic and narrative and really driving capital to adaptation finance. One is water. The second is health. The third is, health related to heat. The third is food security. And the fourth is around resilient infrastructure. I think some of the narrative around adaptation finance has jumped to just one of these things. And from my perspective, it's about broadening that and making it much more investable. So firstly, on water, water is the front line of climate risk. I think we know, 1.8 billion people globally are facing water scarcity this year. And that's actually causing around $50 billion in annual losses in terms of water-related risk. So investing in water resilience is really critical. And we've done a lot of analysis on this at BNP Paribas in terms of the funds and the level of investment going into water resilience is probably the first port of call when it comes to adaptation investment. What does that look like practically? It's flood defenses, it's wastewater treatment, desalination, smart irrigation. Those are both essential, but they're also investable from a water infrastructure perspective. How do you do that? And I will go into the concrete examples a bit later in the panel, but this is essentially for water, it's blended finance, blue and green bonds, outcome-based models where you can measure some of that kind of impact. And critically for sovereigns, MDBs, and utilities, we see this as really important. The second area is around food and agriculture resilience. So climate stress is already a risk to agricultural yields. So without adaptation, we've seen that some regions could face yield drops of around 30% by the end of 2050. But equally, on that market opportunity side, there's a lot of solutions that exist. So drought-resilient seeds, solar irrigation, looking at agri-tech is a huge opportunity as well. And a good example regionally is in Asia. So MSCI found that around the growth for hybrid seed market, so drought-resilient seeds, is around 12% annually, so really large. So adaptation in food systems isn't just resilience, it's actually related to productivity and growth. The third area is heat and health, and I think that we're all in COP, it's really boiling as we all feel that, but this urban heat risk is actually a silent risk and it threatens labour productivity at a macro level, but it also threatens kind of citizen well-being. And so as cities expand, particularly in Asia, where the majority, Asia and Africa, the majority of that increase in urbanization will occur, we need investment in cooling systems, passive insulation, and smart materials. I mean, a random fact is that if you have even a simple innovation like low solar absorption paint can reduce surface temperature by around 5%. And we're already seeing a lot of investment in that from train companies to buildings companies and others 5-degree temperature decrease. From a health perspective, this is important, but it's also a labor issue. And then finally, the infrastructure point. So we've talked quite a lot about examples from resilient infrastructure, but I think that underpins all adaptation in terms of what's required from a challenge perspective. But the return on this is quite significant. So the World Bank estimates that we could save around $4 trillion globally if we actually invest in resilient infrastructure. That's a 4-to-1 return in terms of infrastructure investment. But at the moment, in terms of financing, only around 18% of green bond proceeds from utilities finance adaptation. So from a sector perspective, that's quite a large opportunity. So from resilient infrastructure, we're looking at resilience bonds, adaptation bonds. There was already a mention around parametric insurance, but these instruments are really important to be able to mainstream adaptation finance. So it is maturing. It definitely needs to move a lot faster. But I think if we channel it in these 4 key areas of water, food security, health and heat, and resilient infrastructure, we can actually turn it from more of a reactive cost avoided losses discussion into one that's really about sustainable growth and more resilient economy. And I will talk on the examples quite practically in the next bit.
Thank you, Sarsha. And there's also so much appetite from investors to invest into these bonds. Tokyo issued a resilience bond recently, and it was 7 times oversubscribed. And I think what you mentioned as well about infrastructure is a lot of infrastructure isn't built yet. So how can we make sure that, for example, public procurement systems already have as a standard that every building has to be climate resilient? Nick, finally, heading over to you. Please share with us what challenges you are encountering in your work to invest into adaptation resilience. And then, because we're now heading into the second part of our conversation, I would also love to hear more about the solutions and specifically about SAFA that you just launched.
All right, hello, yes. Thank you so much, Sabrina. Thanks, colleagues. Is that better? There we go. All right. Good afternoon. Is it afternoon? No, it's still the morning. It feels like we've been doing this for a while, right? So this event is New Structures for Adaptation Finance. We as GGGI and with many partners have been doing these new structures discussions in various fora for about 1.5 years now, through the Climate Weeks, through COPs. It was wonderful to have Debbie Palmer speaking for a second time. And it's, for us, has been really a means of doing exactly this. It's zeroing in on these solutions and kind of questioning, like, where are these appropriate scales of action? Is it on the national scale through such fantastic examples as what we've heard from Bangladesh? Is it on the facility scale? Is it both? And I feel like at this COP, we're kind of almost going to get to a direction of travel, a collective aggregate moment where we're all feeling comfortable with how these different pieces fit together. So just a huge recognition for the partners on this panel, for Atlantic Council, for also integrating GGI into the FINI discussion. And it's refreshing to see collaboration rather than competition. I think a lot of agencies can sometimes get a little bit stuck. Anyhow, so to your question, so GGGI is an intergovernmental organization. We function like a UN agency, but we just do green growth and climate interventions. So but we are positioned in a slightly different way. So we sit really within ministries. So the number one set of challenges that we see are really related to governance. I think it's maybe been said and resaid over and over again in these panels, right? Silos, lack of communication between ministries. But these things are real. So yesterday we had on this same platform, we presented the National Adaptation Plan of Sri Lanka. So we had the colleague from Sri Lanka speak. But that document and that process took, I think, 4.5 years, because the COVID, because they had financial crises, because they had a coup, they had repeated rounds of elections. And then not to speak of the challenges of having to restructure, extend the project, the granting. So the real politics getting in the way of things is maybe something that we're not speaking of enough. The only solutions that we've found with GGI are getting the ministries of finance in the room. It's depoliticizing some of these bodies and discussing really how appointees in the environment ministries, for example, are they're kind of put into these longer term positions, and these are not committees which are set up, but we're setting up units of partners. So, for example, in Uganda, we are working with the Climate Finance Unit, which is really meant to be a technical body, which sits outside of any kind of risk zone for the vagaries of politics. So I guess, governance and all the things that go with it. a huge one to unpack, and then I guess when we get to the solutions. And then the second one, so you heard my colleague Ferruccio speaking earlier, and so we work in the same organization, right? But he leads the global green finance team, and I lead the adaptation work. But only until recently have we really been working together to say, actually, the bonds that you're developing, as Sarash, you just said, they don't have good adaptation projects waiting for them. Like a lot of them go to a lot of social programs or to incremental spending, which obviously countries need. But we think that these instruments and financing vehicles can be leveraged in a much more effective way if we see them as really related to a much aligned. I think it was I don't know who, somebody said earlier. I found a really good quote. It was a lack of alignment. I think it was the colleague that just left. It's this misalignment in sequencing, in time, and in scale, which we're trying to solve here. I think I'll stop there on the challenges. I could just keep on going. The list is long.
Take us away on the solutions.
Okay, go straight into solutions.
Yes.
All right. Let me just take a slurp of water.
Please drink water. Does anyone else need water? You're fine? Okay.
It's actually the adaptation challenges we're talking about, we're all experiencing right here.
Exactly. It's true. Lived experience.
Yes, working under heat stress. I definitely feel like it's fried my brain. So at GGGI, we are... Sorry, I'm the only one with some slides for this section. I'm very sorry to impose that on you. So we have started a adaptation finance facility called SAFA. So too many acronyms, I'm very sorry. Too many acronyms in this world. So it's scaling and accelerating finance for adaptation. And it is a collaboration with the Adaptation Fund. So the challenges that I just discussed, I think, are the main motivation for setting this up. So we will be hoping to work with our ministries of finance. So our colleagues sit primarily within either ministries of finance or environment, and structuring bonds and inviting investment into bond mechanisms, but with a much more close alignment with quality projects coming from NAPS, but also projects that come out of the Adaptation Fund's M&E verified pipeline, right? So we know the Adaptation Fund has been around forever, and they are one of the best track records in saying these locally led adaptation projects work in context, but often they are at small scale, and often they are only grant-based. So the questions that we're asking is, how do we take one of these projects? So, I don't know, say working with fishermen in, we'll stay with Sri Lanka, in northern Sri Lanka. We know that if they shift to a different fishing method, if they do use different tools, then they might be able to catch more if they diversify the livelihoods in like 27 villages. But these scales are very small, right? The impacts are there, they're recorded, but we have not scaled those up across one country, so in this case across Sri Lanka, or across countries with similar geophysical risks, or countries with similar socioeconomic vulnerabilities. So we're just trying to kind of connect those dots a little bit with this facility. We see it really as being complementary to the country-led programs. I think we're also understanding how it connects with other facilities. You know, the UNDP and Italy-led program. There are lots of different facilities, and I think last year, I think Debbie on our panel said there are too many facilities. I remember her saying last year at the COP, and I think I disagree. I think we need more. I think we need so many facilities. Sorry, oh, she's still here. I thought she'd gone. I think we can all, but maybe we need to sit around the table and say, you do this, I'll do that, and just to make sure we're covering all the areas that we need to do, right? Because adaptation is systems-based, right? It's place-based. It's about integrating across different sectors. So the colleague from BNP, you were just saying exactly like at the same time, these sectors need specific deployment strategies. You can't design. So one of the approaches with SAFA, so I'll show you the flowy diagram. One of the approaches with SAFA is having partners for thematic windows to structure those. So we're hoping to work with partners on adaptation and health. We were at a Wilton Park event with some incredible partners a few months ago. We're hopefully under discussions maybe with IFAD on an agriculture and food systems window. But so the idea is really to then shift. So the SPV. So we would look to finding a banking partner who would then manage this SPV. And so some of these projects, once we have looked at the scaling, looked at all of the bells and whistles, the best practice in project preparation. We have a lot of AI partnerships for a lot of this. Yeah, I guess the data is the other issue we've not been discussing, right? The data challenge. To try and really, I don't know, get these adaptation projects on steroids to make them maybe not 15% ROI. I mean, I was on a call with an organization who will not be named, and they said, oh, how do you make health projects in adaptation bankable? Our investors, they want 16% return. And I was like, who gets 16% return nowadays in any economy, in any sector? It doesn't exist. So how can we look at adaptation and expect that to happen there? So we're being realistic. Some of these projects will just be good projects in a kind of traditional way, and they will not be eligible for private sector finance. But some of them we hope would then be scalable through the project preparation support and also this alignment with the bond instruments. So yeah, it's a work in progress. We're really looking for partners. We're excited we kicked it off a couple of weeks ago in Seoul during our Global Green Growth Week. So yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nick. And I think the truth is probably both, right? We need new financing vehicles that address a really specific issue like bundling, but also tap into the existing structures. Most blended finance solutions do not mainstream adaptation and resilience. The existing structures need to build capacity to do that too. And that's why I was really pleased to hear from the example in Bangladesh that microfinance plays such a critical role, because microfinance is an existing structure. Microfinance can get to the most vulnerable, and then microfinance institutions themselves can refinance their portfolios through international investments, and maybe even get a reduction of interest rate if they can show lower credit default risk because of resilience. So I'd like to go back to you, Mr. Sohail, and hear a bit more about the really tangible, innovative solutions on financing adaptation. We've heard some before, but please, we're, I think, all very hungry in understanding more how the solutions work and get inspired.
Thank you once again. Solution number one is what I'm really feel very strengthened that the knowledge director is with us. So this partnership is needed. Number two is, for adaptation, there is no close substitute even, rather than enhancing the capacity building. The climate finance gap, everybody talks about the climate finance gap. But I strongly feel that climate literacy gap is wider than that. Because we need to develop the project proposal, we need to implement the things in the right way. And it's not the case for the government only. It is the case in the NGO, in the corporates, even in the banks. We sat with 75 managing directors of different banks in Bangladesh. They said that, we are in favor of operationalizing the central bank decision that 20% green financing must be ensured, 5% green financing and 20% sustainable financing. But when we develop the project, we are not the decision maker. Ultimately, the board is the decision maker. When you go before the board listen it with a rapt attention, very solid attention. After the presentation, they ask, where is our profit? So sensitization of the officials only not is the solution. Even the decision makers, so as with the not only the civil servants, also with the parliamentarians, I mean the member of parliaments, the ministers, since I mean the better orientation is needed everywhere. Third point is, you know, the loan is a primitive. All the vulnerable countries are suffering from debt burden. Some of the African friends, they are talking about that 25% of their revenue generated money goes to the repayment. So what is needed is new innovative financing mechanism is needed. Say equity investment. Say the bonds. In Bangladesh also we are trying for the green bonds and the orange bond, because the women are the worst sufferer. And in Bangladesh, the southern part, 4.4 million women are suffering from the early hypertensive diseases because of the salinity intrusion in the water. Even they are facing the cancerous diseases in their reproductive health. So, if you want to solve the problem with debt, that is creating another problem. That's why, please come up with the equity investment. So, even in the health sector, if someone wants to be confirmed, we have a research that someone wants to be confirmed that I have the cancer, it needs 44,000 Bangladeshi currency. It's not very easy for the vulnerable to bear. That's why we can make the things easier for the vulnerables, and climate-induced health hazards, there are a chance for huge investment, preparing the bankable projects. Again, the point is whether we have the capacity to prepare the bankable projects or not. Not only on the government. That is why last solution, what we are doing, that we are trying to enhance our capacity, the whole of government approach. Say we started one course recently, that name of that course is Capital Market Instrument for Climate Finance. Because you know, the online course, the huge participation, 991 instantly within 3 days. And not only from the government, from the NGOs, from the corporates, even from our UN colleagues, they are participating in the course. And we are trying to develop that the second phase, the only best 200 will go, and the third phase, 50 will go, and they will prepare the bankable project. So we are trying in our way, and NDC partnership, we are closely working with the NDC partnership in Bangladesh. And at the same time, the GGGI too. The GGGI has got a multi-country program, but I would request GGGI, because the multi-country, what happens, you know, that we don't say $40 million project, 10 country. If I ask what is for Bangladesh, the answer will be 0.5 million or 1 million. So I said that this is the simple math. 1 into 10 into 1 equal to 10 million. What is the other 30 million? So please pay attention to the country based. So because every country is unique. So that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you. It needs to be country-based and prioritized by the country as well to signal what is needed. We're almost over time, but Amanda and Sarisha, would you concisely also share some of the specific solutions you're working on?
Yeah, no, I'll be very concise, and it's knowledge that we're working on, or that I wanted to share. And the first one is helping to standardize some of the learning that we're seeing from countries, and help countries and institutional partners ensure that they're talking the same language. So last year with the GCF, we developed a climate investment planning and mobilization framework that offers some of the best practices that we've seen. But what we did recently, we worked with the Adaptation Fund, ADB, and the Commonwealth Secretariat to develop an adaptation supplement. Because when we look at the adaptation sector, there are very specific steps that are different and important to make sure that those are surfaced. We've also just started to work with GGGI on a new project to really understand different country-led mechanisms that are being taken to increase investment through long-term and programmatic approaches. So this talks a little bit about the challenges that I mentioned before. And we're doing this work through the center really to reach LDCs and SIDS. And what we're finding is, again, no surprise, but it's helping to elevate these solutions, that country-led programmatic approaches really offer a compelling solution to move away from these fragmented short-term projects and really provide a coherent architecture for mobilizing both domestic and international finance and ensuring that it's being deployed as effectively as possible, as efficiently as possible, at scale. But I think most importantly, helping to ensure that there's an alignment with national development processes and budget planning. So I won't get into all the details on that, but just to state this is a piece of work that's coming. We're really excited about it, and I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Over to you, Sarsha.
Thank you. So I think I wanted to talk about some of the really practical approaches that we're seeing when it comes to some of that scalability of adaptation finance. So going to look at in 4 areas in terms of sovereigns, multilaterals, corporates, and the insurance market. So what I would say is really important is that there's no one-size-fits-all model when it comes to adaptation finance. It takes different forms depending on the region, sector, and also the hazard that's being addressed. So from a sovereign and local government perspective, we see that a lot of the approach depends on the size and the type of adaptation that's required. So you mentioned the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. They did a 300 million euro resilience bond. It was the world's first resilience bond certified under the climate bonds resilience criteria. I know that your colleague mentioned some things on it, but the demand it drew from an investor perspective was huge. It was 2.2 billion of demand from a euro perspective for a 300 million deal. So that kind of ratio shows that there's definitely appetite in terms of city issuance when it comes to resilience-focused investments of sovereigns. Other countries are looking at embedding adaptation within either their green bond frameworks or KPI-linked debt. So aligning those national adaptation priorities with their funding strategies. So we've done a bit of analysis on this, and with our sustainable capital markets team, we found that in Europe, for example, France allocated around 16% of their sovereign green bond issuance in 2024 to adaptation. Italy was around 6%, and Slovenia did a sustainability bond framework over the last few years that we structured, and that financed flood management and water resilience. So there's lots of different approaches when it comes to sovereign financing in terms of adaptation. The second area I want to focus on is blue bonds for coastal resilience and freshwater resilience. So blue finance, and we do see this as a kind of separate asset class to green finance to some extent, is funding coastal resilience and freshwater systems resilience. So that supports both ecosystem restoration and community resilience. Some really good examples from this region, actually. So in Latin America, CAF, the Regional Development Bank, we supported them on a 100 million euro LAC blue bond. And that was structured and distributed by our teams at BNP Paribas, and that basically supports coastal resilience and infrastructure in terms of looking at marine ecosystem protection. Cabay, another example, so they did a 30 million euro blue bond that finances the sustainable recovery of I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but Yajoa in Honduras, and that's looking at strengthening freshwater resilience and protecting a key national water resource. That's actually the first, and sorry, on Cabay I should have said, because it is about partnerships, the Cabay transaction was the first global gateway-backed adaptation project in the LAC region. So again, that shows the kind of inter-regional collaboration necessary. critically blended finance. I won't talk about every example, but I just wanted to share the example of Turkey. So in Turkey, we worked with the World Bank on a financing adaptation for growth project. So in terms of, everyone talks about catalytic capital, but I wanted to put some numbers on this. So with that particular innovation, there was 360 million euros guarantees through TSKB, so local bank. That mobilized another 600 million in commercial lending. So you can see here that kind of ratios on catalytic capital that's potential, and that basically supports a lot of adaptation financing locally in the region. And finally, Peru, another example.
We need to wrap up, unfortunately.
Okay, sure. So I'm happy to take that offline. But I do want to just mention two key things that are important. I think not many people talk about the prospect of corporate issuance when it comes to adaptation finance, but we've already seen quite a lot of water utilities that are doing adaptation-based financing in terms of use of proceeds for water resource management, leakage reduction, and flood resilience. And finally, I think parametric insurance, linking triggers to rainfall, heat, and other kind of rapid disaster liquidity triggers is super important. And I think, but one thing I would caveat, which is very important in parametric, we can't be doing parametric insurance that isn't reinforcing kind of new resilience norms. If the payouts just go towards rebuilding what's been lost, then essentially we're not building infrastructure that's resilient. So these approaches really have to go hand in hand. There is a portfolio of solutions, I would say, but it requires quite a lot of systematic thinking and critically looking at it in a much more scientifically led way.
Thank you, Sarja, for all these fantastic examples. I think now after this discussion, we have to get started and get it done. Do it. Thank you so much for a fantastic discussion, for your time. Thank you to the audience for your attention. I wish you all a rest of the COP.